style. Style insurance, we are a small independent insurance agency.
Stolly would be you.
You started it, brother,
Great having him watching you.
Great.
No.
Fortunate, wow.
Actually, the fifth one's right now.
Yeah.
No kidding, pressure's on it, man.
Trip over the shop, walking the board.
You know, there's a company, and you know, I forget the name of it, in Bryan's, Spangler or something, you know,
Yeah,
Spangler's,
yeah,
they make dum-dums. Yeah, and they are in their, I think, fourth generation. They actually interview by the third generation, because of what can happen to a company that size, they actually interview it, so this time it's a nephew, not the direct descendant. I mean, I don't know if they interview it, they somehow the family picks, so it's not just, because you know, by third or fourth generation. It's a big enough company, it's like, 400 people work there. That, you know, companies like that by third or fourth generation have problems sometimes. And they've been really masterful. The guy that runs it now, I talked to the other guy, helping him some stuff. He grew up in Washington, and he moved back like 10 years ago, and they grew him. It's kind of cool.
We wanted it, those guys.
Yeah, well, insurance business, you can't like sit around and have the business come to you, right? You are.
Jay Beck.
Jay, what's your profession? I saw you in the bathroom, but that doesn't count. So
Yeah. Clear. No, I have cleaned that, but I just retired from managing the county fairground.
Okay.
Long time farmer.
So you're running, you're the nominee, right? Which in this county, we have a Republican nominee, kind of gets you most of the way there, Jay. It's sort of the same thing, isn't it? If one of the votes are having a Democratic. You've run the county, you've been chair of the fair board?
Yes.
You've been civilian. 30 years.
Correct.
So what's your farm?
No, I've been full-time farming for 7 years, and I farm on the side. About 500 acres of corn. Yeah, we put the livestock when I got the job.
You're good. Production this year, did you get to 100 bushels this year?
Actually, I haven't started harvest yet, but I think it's going to be we just
What'd you get last year?
we just planted 5 acres. It's not going to be that much.
Because a lot of farmers, it's a little bit, well, a lot of them are down to 100, 110.
There's a, there's a little stretch.
20 years.
Exactly.
Yeah, just occasionally the right.
Soybeans 40 again?
Oh, no, because of all the late August rains.
Soybean, someone's 20 million, like soybeans.
They're indeterminate. They just waited and waited and waited and waited. Yeah, and I think that's why we haven't done anything yet, because they waited.
You are?
Jay Sowers, photographer and camera guy.
Talk to Kim. I'm here 6 minutes early, so I get to meet, we even talked to Heather. I talked to Jay, he told me about corn production, I want to know more.
Hi, Dave Trinko, one of the editors.
Good to see you, Dave, thanks.
Good, how are you?
Good.
What?
100%
Yeah. Oh,
Questioning Jim's sanity.
I don't know what he was thinking. Everybody good must have been busy. That's all I can say.
I figured we asked them, we might have, it was nice to have them in front of me. You want your own copy? It came out twice. Oh, on Facebook, we asked people what they thought. And the camera is live, and so it's the microphone, so I choose not to comment on them any further.
Couple just basic liberal conservative questions. EPA regulations.
Let the tweeting begin.
Specific votes.
Quite the collection on that.
Get everybody here, everybody except for my boss right now. She's started early now, so we're gonna wrap.
Thought you were doing the empty chair thing. What's
What's
that, Jim?
Anyway, we'd like to thank you all for coming today, and I'd like to thank the panel for taking your time out of your busy schedules to be here, and to Senator Brown for taking time to meet with us. We've been doing these for 10+ years, and to me, this is what's really fun about a newspaper, and getting people like yourself together and the senator together and to talk about the issues every day. I mean, if we ever disagree on things, I think the process is great. I mean, we've had, like I say, we've been doing it for 10 years. We've had senators and governor candidates, and one of the first ones we did was with George Voinovich, and we were real nervous setting everything up and had everything all set up, and the photographers told us when they wanted him to sit, and we were waiting for him to come in, and he walked in and slipped the table to those folks. I'm sorry, I forgot my hearing aids. I'm going to have to sit right here so you can hear everybody, and just rearrange the whole table. Then I think yours, the first one you came, you got a hernia operation. I just had a hernia operation. Yeah, blame that on you guys. I'm so intimidated. You made it. Made it there, so. The information in the form will be used in the news story of the old run of week from Sunday, and we'll also use it as far as our editorial endorsement should we decide to do it there. And you'll have what the process we're going to do. We're just going to go around the table and ask questions. It's kind of a informal, formal thing, so if somebody asks a question, you have a follow-up, go ahead and chip in, do that right away at that time. At this time, I think I'll just go around and do real quick introductions, and we'll let Sherrod do a little opening remarks, and I'll start on the questions.
Start with the late guy?
Start with the late guy. Start early.
Jim Shine, publisher of Lima News.
Judy J. I'm the Information and Referral Specialist at the Allen County Council on Aging.
Jared Walsh, I'm a local accountant in the seal shop in Rochester, New
I'm Pat O'Connor, president of Range Clean Manufacturing here in Lima.
I'm Will Carter with Honolulu Rental System.
Mike Nisley, business manager of the Plumbers, Pipe Fitters, and Service Techs Union in Lima. Also, I'm president of Lima Building Trades Council.
I'm Tim Stanford, and I'm with the Open Road here locally.
Tim Stolley from Stolley Insurance here, and we also have 3 locations in surrounding counties.
Jay Bagg, I guess I'm commissioner-elect, sorta, and local farmer, retired fair manager.
David Trinko, new media editor for the Lima News.
Heather Rutz, reporter at the Lima News.
Okay, I'm Jim Crummell, the editor of the Lima News. I'll start there. Sherrod will let you do some opening remarks here first.
Sure, thanks. Thank you for doing this. I remember this already at work, but I forgot. It was, yeah, this is way off the subject, but I've been in the hospital for 22 surgeries in my life. One, I had a hernia surgery when I was 19. I was in the hospital for 4 days, 4 nights, and then I had it 6 years ago. It was a double hernia, way more than you want to know, and I was there for 1 hour. And that's how people do their jobs differently as they go over that. It was about a 30-year period. That's way more personal information than me. Thank you, and I'll keep it very brief. I appreciate how you remember 6 years ago you did not do endorsements but sitting around the table, and this is a really good cross-section of the community, and how important that is to see different businesses, different occupations, different parts of town, and all that. I look at this job in many ways. I mean, I know what people tend to write about or to know about a U.S. senator or congressman or woman is voting records, is amendments, and bill sponsor and all that, and I'm proud of what I've done that way, but even more so is how I see this job as convening people to talk about what we can do to make this government and this country work better. And I look at Jay at the end of the table, and we did one of the most important things I've done about 200 roundtables around the state where I'll get 15, 20 people together. We've done at least one every time. We've done 3 in Allen County. And sometimes it'll be veterans, sometimes farmers, sometimes a more cross-section of people. But we did a couple of them, and nearby, and the Roundtable's in Wood and in Henry counties. And out of that, with farmers, and out of that came legislation that is part of the Farm Bill right now, supported by pretty much all the farm groups, the Corn Growers, the Farm Bureau, Farmers Union, as strengthening the farmer's safety net, yet saving significant taxpayer dollars because we eliminated the so-called farm subsidies, the direct payments, billions and billions of dollars that the government has, I think, stupidly over the years provided mostly to profitable farms, mostly in other parts of the country. And that's the way I like this job, is I do roundtables, I do discussions, I can convene people to, my title helps me do that in many ways. And it turns into either legislation or turns into ideas, usually bipartisan. This bill, the Farm Bill, is with John Thune, everybody in South Dakota. I'm a guy, more conservative than I am, but a guy that we work together well and things like that. And I think it produces action. I mean, I understand Derek, I was endorsed this week by the Ohio Society of CPAs, which is a more Republican than Democratic group, but a group that plays great. And they endorsed me. I think if you'd ask them, is because I work well with people across the spectrum and across the aisle, and understand that the most important thing I do is how I work with the private sector to create jobs. That's the main focus of my job in my office, and other stuff there. And many of the answers I think will be around that, whether it's the auto rescue or enforcement of trade laws, and what that does for manufacturing, Patrick, involved in that. So lots of stuff there.
Well, I'll start off the question, and kind of, we're going to start with you and go around this way. Senator, we had a column in today's paper by David Green, who runs the Hobby Lobby stores. And he's a real religious guy. His stores are closed on Sunday because of his religious beliefs. And he was talking about the healthcare mandate and how he disagrees with that because that's going to force him to buy insurance that supports his belief that some medications for pro-abortion medications. He doesn't think he should have to do that. He's going to fight that. I mean, how do you answer Mr. Green about his?
Well, it will not require him to buy. I just don't agree with the assumption. It does not require him to buy any kind of plans with any kind of pro-abortion medications at all. I think we have a goal in this country of health insurance being affordable, and I think this healthcare law will help to do that. It will allow people that are particularly small businesses to go into a larger insurance pool. It does not displace insurance companies. I mean, this was an add-on. This is really what Governor Romney, this whole bill really is much what Governor Romney suggested in Massachusetts and got through, and what some of the more conservative think tanks in Washington 25 years ago, a guy named Mr. Butler came up with to encourage people ultimately to pool those resources. I mean, Tim knows about insurance, and you do insurance. If you have a company of 30 people, and for small business of 30 people, and 2 of them get cancer, your insurance rates just will blow off the roof. And if you're into a larger pool, the way the Cleveland Growth Association's done it, that President Bush the first kind of used as a model, and the way we did this exchange with, I'll be in the exchange, and so any federal employee will be in the exchange. Lots of small business will join. People can join individually as businesses, and it will end up stabilizing costs. I mean, healthcare costs are going down. It just means that it should be that the increases that we've seen for 20 years will be minor.
It's like jobs. In this room, our own job is always the most important job. And it's kind of a combination of jobs, because one of our biggest cost persons of company is petroleum. The actual movement and shipment of goods and services around the country, around North America. A national security issue is on the way. I was listening to Bloomberg and Netanyahu's speech at the UN about the Iranian-Israel issue. The Keystone XL project. Why did you vote no? And shouldn't we really get after that with more assertiveness to make that a job-producing initiative in states, and also as a way to reduce costs for existing companies, and also to kind of enhance our national security as well?
Fair question. First of all, the first round of discussions on this, the governor of Nebraska, a Republican, said this doesn't make sense for us initially. It doesn't make sense for us on environmental, and what happens to the potential, I think he was talking about the aquifer in Nebraska. they rerouted it in a way that he was satisfied. But I think those issues, I think, matter, and that's what happens. Second, there have been oil industry analysts, it's not consensus, but a number of them have said that it would actually, because of, and I don't pretend to fully understand this part of it, but because of the way oil moves, refined, pre-refined and refined oil moves, that it would actually mean costs would go up a bit in the Midwest because it would shift oil supplies in a way that would make it more scarce in this region. It's a bit counterintuitive. Third, I am concerned about the way that the oil is, with the tar sands, the way it's produced in Canada, the way that it's drilled in Canada. I'm supportive of what we do in Eastern Ohio with natural gas. I think it can be done, needs to be done, and can be done, and protect groundwater. It's a potential economic boom there. I want to make sure that Ohio workers get hired for these jobs, that some of your members that would not necessarily work in the fields, but would be building, be involved in some of the equipment, would be in manufacturing, would be Ohio jobs. And I was talking to a guy, some students actually, at a plant that's going to double in size. We feel he was coming out of the local called, and he's learning. He and a bunch of colleagues are learning how to weld in vocational school and career centers, and those jobs will stay in Ohio that way. I think Keystone has become a very politicized issue that won't really, even if it's environmentally safe, and I'm not convinced it is, for public health reasons. I just don't think it's going to add much. I subscribe to it in terms of supply. I subscribe to the theory that everything's on the table, and that means solar, it also means biomass, it also means natural gas, it also means oil, it also means coal. The government for years has had a bias towards oil. We still give, and we've tried to eliminate tax breaks for the oil industry, tax subsidies that are several $1 billion. And that just makes no sense. I don't think, though, that Keystone would matter other than it's become a big issue like Solyndra. It would really matter in terms of significantly, and I don't think it overcomes as a result of the environmental issues.
In your introductory comment, you talked about working across the aisle, which I appreciate, and goes to my question about the automatic spending cuts that are set to go into effect in January under the Budget Control Act. Obviously, that's going to have a devastating impact to Ohio hospitals. Ohio Hospital Association estimates it's going to be about $138 million impact to us through lower Medicare reimbursements. What would you do to work with the other side of the aisle to prevent these arbitrary reductions?
Thanks for the question. I was part of both parties. The president passed the legislation that led to this. Call it fiscal cliff, call it sequestration, whatever. But we have. I'm sorry, this is too long an answer. There's been criticism of the Senate for not passing the budget. The budget is a resolution that doesn't have the force of law. It's passed by the House and the Senate. The president doesn't sign a resolution, so it's a blueprint, but no more than a blueprint on congressional spending. Congress instead passed something called the Budget Control Act, supported by Mitch McConnell, John Boehner, and Harry Reid, and Nancy Pelosi, and signed by the president. The Budget Control Act is a document that actually has the force of law. It's called an act because the president signed it, not a resolution. The Budget Control Act had more than slightly this much, under $1.990 billion in cuts over 10 years already that are being made, and then a second round of more than $1 trillion, 1.1 trillion cuts. I know those are big numbers, 1.08 or something trillion cuts prospectively to come from the super committee, which didn't come to agreement, and then ultimately to what happens in January when all this takes effect automatically. That's sort of the backdrop. The problem is manifold. I mean, first of all, a number of people have said, well, this is going to kill the defense industry, and it's going to cost us so many jobs in defense. Well, I agree with that, and nobody's fought harder on the Lima tank plant than I have. Nobody. I mean, I worked a lot with Congressman Jordan, but nobody's fought harder than I have on the Lima tank plant. Carl Levin is coming into the state for me, so the chairman of the Armed Services Committee. He's been very helpful. I've worked with him, as has Senator Portman on it. But the defense, if they're going to argue defense cuts are going to cost jobs, so are health care cuts. frankly, I think some studies show $1 billion in defense cuts is fewer jobs than $1 billion in healthcare cuts. But I don't want to get into that debate for now. But the point is that this has got to be shared. We've got to move towards a balanced budget. We don't want to do the cuts too sharply now because they will cost jobs. I think we write the law so that the cuts come over time and are certain, not anything's repealable by an act of Congress. So we've got to make those cuts. I think that at the same time, taxes have to be on the table. If majority members of the House or Senate are going to say they will never ever vote for a tax increase on anybody at any time, we won't get to a balanced budget. I mean, it's easy, Pat. I mean, I'm sure Michael or anybody else can come in and say, I'll never vote for tax increases, but they're either not telling the truth or they're not serving the public. And, your commissioner-elect, like, close enough to Commissioner-elect Begg, is going to have to make revenue decisions at some point in their career, as the county commissioners have to. And even that pledge even means you can't vote to eliminate oil company subsidies, because it's a tax break. So that's just, you can't govern that way. So it's going to have to be shared. It's going to have to be bipartisan, whoever wins the White House. I'm hopeful, here's my most hopeful part, is in the debates starting, I guess, the first and third, I think, are the domestic debates. I'm hopeful the candidates will talk about this in a way that it gives us a better indication of what's going to happen after November, because it's too hard to predict. What do we do with the sustainable growth rate for your doctors? What do we do with the extension of unemployment benefits? What do we do with the Bush tax cuts? Do we let them expire only on upper income people, or do we expire on everybody, do we expire on nobody? I mean, there's so many moving parts that I'm hopeful, not just who wins the election for president, for the Senate and House, but what the presidential candidates say will give us a little more of a roadmap on how this is going to work. But I'm very concerned. I don't know, one maybe piece of good news, and it goes back to Jim's question about the healthcare law. There are some things in this healthcare bill that are going to help with stabilizing healthcare costs. It's not Medicare and Medicaid are the problem in as much as it's just healthcare costs generally. And Medicare is pretty efficient as a healthcare insurer, if you will, or subcontracted insurer. So, however, but I think we're going to see potential, if we do this right, some better stabilizing of healthcare. Let me give you one real quick example. One of the things that hospitals are incentivized to do under the healthcare law is to keep people out of the hospital that first 30 days after discharge. So somebody's discharged from the hospital. Are they taking their medicine? Are they doing their, some of the people you want to do, are they taking their medicine? Are they doing their rehab? Are they eating right? And are they going to the doctor? And so one of the things that comes out of the healthcare law is we're encouraging by Medicare reimbursement that hospitals better keep track of their recently discharged patients in a way that they do better compliance. And it means they'll come back into the hospital less. It'll be better for their health. It'll be better for taxpayers. And that's one of the things that having on healthcare law is controversial. I assume many of you don't like it. I assume some of you do. But it's got things like that in it aren't talked about much that really will save dollars and be better for public health overall. And that should play into the cuts that everybody's going to get. I assume will be easier to absorb if some of that's part of it.
Senator, I'm going to go back to the auto rescue question. Our Lima area, we've been a direct recipient of this, our local Ford engine plant. We've got over 200 building trades people working there right now on a new engine line that we wouldn't even got this, without the help of what you guys did and President Obama, betting on the American worker. But with that, I think a lot of people lose track of the investment that is made in the return, and we've got close to $25 million in wages and benefits right here in this local economy.
The Ford engine plant.
Yeah,
like Ford engine.
Yeah, Ford engine, and then we have direct plants. I have 3 Honda plants in my jurisdiction. We've had 2 that have expansions, and
you guys are doing the work.
Correct.
It's a non-union plant, but unions are doing the work.
Correct, because they believe in the efficiency that skilled trade brings. But in a much larger sense, I want to ask you, what has the auto rescue really meant to the state of Ohio? Because you are a U.S. Senator here, and can you explain why you personally chose to support
it? It was an easy call. I mean, nothing that's complicated, it's that easy. But my recollection is paper supported the rescue. I think that most people that are in Ohio and really in the state. I work with Senator Boynovich on this. It was originally President Bush asked for support from the Senate. It was defeated the first time. I think it got over 50, but not 60 votes. I don't remember that. But we have this increasingly dysfunctional rule of 60 votes in the Senate, regardless of who's in power. Came back, President Obama brought it, and using TARP money, the bank rescue money, the bank bailout money, directed it into GM and Chrysler, as you know. Ford, interestingly, and I know Ford's a bigger presence in this county than GM and Chrysler, but Ford asked us to pass it, so did Honda, because they understood what happens to the collapse of the supply chain. I mean, if you buy a Chevy Cruise, I'm not advertising for them, but my wife traded in her 6-year-old Pontiac Glide for a Chevy Cruise recently, and paid full price, just anyway. But the Chevy Cruise, the engine comes out of Defiance, the transmission comes out of Toledo. That could, we said the sound system comes south of here in West Carolina. I mean, these are, it really is the supply chain, and that's what Ford understood, that's what Honda understood, that in all 4 of those companies today are making major investments. Ford is, what it's doing here, it's investing in their engine. Honda's doing a new model. Chrysler's investing big in Toledo. Chevy's investing big in Parma and Youngstown, the stamping plant and the assembly plant in Youngstown. 850,000 jobs, according to the Center for Automotive Research, is said are connected to the auto industry in the state. I mean, that's a loose connection, but it's, you know, it's hardware dealers near the plants, all that. So it's a number of, people forget how many sheet metal workers and pipe fitters and laborers are in these plants all the time, as you know very well. Any of these, I mean, that's whether it's Husky here or any other plant or an auto plant or whatever, you know, you guys have big presence, obviously, all the trades. And those are, you know, those are all middle class jobs with good benefits. So the auto rescue, and I'm surprised, and I'm not going to talk much about my opponent at all, but he's opposed to the auto rescue. I mean, he said I was un-American for voting for it because some Delphi workers, and this is tragic, but some Delphi workers have not had their pensions topped up. And it's not their fault, and they were in the wrong place at the wrong time, unfortunately, in a way that you know, the GM decided that the Delphi workers were not going to be fully, will get their pensions topped up. It's cost many of them 40 or 50% of their earned pensions, and I'm trying every day to figure out with that legislation to make up for that. They're mostly concentrated in Dayton and in Warren, Youngstown area. The other thing about the auto rescue that was so important is it's not just making sure that Ford and the two companies that weren't invested in by taxpayers, Ford and Honda, the 2 big Ohio, is that because of the supply chains. One of the other big things from the auto rescue is what we're doing now with local sourcing of components that are going into these vehicles. For instance, the Toledo Jeep plant where they assemble the Wrangler and the Liberty, the Jeep Wrangler, Jeep Liberty. That plant prior to the auto rescue was 50% domestic source. 50% of the components assembled in the Toledo plant were made in the U.S. Today it's 75%. Chrysler, GM in Youngstown, the same phenomenon. More of their products that go into the Chevy Cruise come from the United States, and a number in both those examples, a number of them from Ohio. I don't have the percentage from Ohio only, but so it was, you know, there were always problems with everything. But Senator Voinovich and I, and Senator Lugar from the state just to the west of here, worked together in this, both parties. There was opposition. There was initially more opposition than support, but in this region we understood how important it was. Because you know, we make things. We're the 3rd leading manufacturing state in the country, and we're an auto state. We're also a farm state. We're also an aerospace state. We're a food processing state. We're a lot of things, but auto is key to the state's economy. And you know, if we had stepped up, President Bush first and President Obama, this industry, we would have probably been in a depression. I think that's a fair assessment. And the last point, I'm sorry, is we unemployment rate early in 2010. When the auto rescue really started to kick in, and the Recovery Act, and trade enforcement, and I'll talk about that in a second. What trade enforcement has meant to a company here like PCS Nitrogen. But I'll talk about that a little bit. But all those things brought the trade. It helped to bring helps. I'm not saying this is the whole thing, but brought the unemployment rate in the state from over 10.5% 2+ years ago to under 7.5. It's still too high. There's still lots of people at 7.5 is not the whole story. There's lots of people that have given up. But that that's a significant drop in unemployment, partly, in large part, I think, because of auto trade enforcement and recovery.
Senator, yes, Tim Stanford. Remember I had Field Realty here, and so it's giving you the opportunity to have a front row seat on the economic collapse that we experienced. So I wanted to ask you about real estate, and it's nice that led into it, the auto bailout, and the TARP, so that it fits nicely. I guess, do you own a home?
Of course, yeah.
And
It's worth less than when I bought it. That's your question.
No, that's obvious.
I paid like a lot of money for Chevy Cruze, but it's still not a very expensive car, and it gets good mileage. I mentioned that. Patrick, you sent it. I'm trying to anticipate here.
When you bought the house, did you finance it? Did you get a mortgage? And
20% down, because I have a decent job that I can afford to, and I knew I was brought up to know, do that if you can.
Sure. And
And I had a good realtor, man, trust me.
which is good. You always want to rely on the advice of professionals.
We've also refinanced since 2 years ago, something like that, when interest rates are so low.
Well, and I guess where part of my concern comes up with Hartman, with real estate.
It's not like a trial lawyer.
Well, I don't want to, and I'm trying, well, where I want to get to is the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau is what has come out of the Dodd-Frank Act, is kind of the answer to a lot of the issues that came up. And my concern is that it's a solution that's kind of looking for a problem, that it doesn't really address what led to the economic crisis. And then also that I think that Ben Bernanke is probably addressing more of the problems, but is getting less of the credit. So I guess I was going to kind of throw all of that to you to see what kind of response you had.
I voted for Bernanke in the first confirmation. I wasn't in the Senate second when I did, with some reluctance. I think I like him, and I like him personally, it's got nothing to do with it. I like him generally in his performance. I think he was not aggressive enough early on jobs. You know, the Fed has two co-equal, I believe, under the law, responsibilities, keeping inflation low and employment. I think there's been a bias at the Fed, certainly in the past, often under presidents of both parties, towards inflation and not towards jobs. And I mean, I understand that they need a balance. I think they've not done it quite right, but generally I don't disagree with what you said about Bernanke. I think the Consumer Bureau, I guess I think if the Consumer Bureau had been there prior to all this, and all this doesn't just mean 2008 collapse, it means when people were doing the no-doc loans and the interest-only loans and the down payments of whatever they were doing, way less than they should have, that part of it was not especially, sometimes it was just bad luck for somebody. And I say that for this reason, Ohio, I believe no state can claim this title if it's a title. Ohio, as of last year, had 14 consecutive years of more foreclosures than the year before. I don't believe any state had that. You know, Nevada and California had foreclosures because of speculation. We didn't have, we had it because of declining manufacturing. We lost from 2000 to 2010, we lost 5 million manufacturing jobs.
Excuse me, let me interrupt.
Okay, go ahead.
As tragic as the record of foreclosures are, and the hardship that it's caused for people, the part of that was unreported or underreported is that the default rate really never got above 5%. And so 95% of mortgages were being paid. And while consumers are sympathetic, I don't think there's been enough attention to that many of the banks and the money industry have been victimized more. And again, back to Ben Bernanke, particularly with his quantitative easing approach, that he's providing a market for mortgage-backed securities to provide the liquidity to keep financing going. And that seems to be more directly at the heart of the solution than, well, I mean, even when you got your mortgage, I don't know, you probably never run across the local prosecutor, Dan Berry. Well, Dan used to be in private practice. Dan used to be in private practice. Well, Dan used to be in private practice, and Dan conducted quite a bit of real estate closing. And Dan he did the best real estate closings I've ever seen. I've been in real estate for 26 years. And Dan would have a whole stack of documents for the mortgage, like you probably signed. And so we can sit here all day and go through this line by line and explain all the ins and outs of it, the intricacies of the law. He said, I can sum it up for you. If you pay, you stay. If you don't, you won't. And a mortgage transaction, regardless of whether there's no doc or anything else, isn't a whole lot more complicated than that. So again, my concern is, I printed out, I didn't bring it, is that there's this whole other level of bureaucracy now, and I'm not sure that it's really.
Okay, I'm not going to argue with you that. First of all, I'm not a lawyer, and I see those forms, and I can't, like most buyers, we can't figure them out. And one of the things Consumer Protection Agency does, I think, is require the realtor and the bank to start being more upfront with what the stuff's really all about, because most of us aren't lawyers and buy houses. What I was going to say about the number of foreclosures is not even the people who lost their homes, but the people in those neighborhoods when people lost their homes. Because you've had clients, you've seen the value of, my home's gone down in value. I mean, it's really the whole real estate market. I mean, that many foreclosures right nearby, but if you do, every time there's a foreclosure across the street or 5 houses down the street, your home drops, what's the national average? I don't know, 3%, 2%, whatever it is, but it adds up. And so I guess I think in this country there are very sophisticated buyers that are just going to pay their mortgage, but you lose your job. If you lost your job at Husky, or these workers now that are not working at Husky, and you get behind your payments, it's pretty hard to, no matter how smart you are, how much you even read this stuff, you at least need to know if you're, a number of people didn't understand the mortgage, the balloon mortgage, that when you pay 3%, then it goes up to 5%. People need to understand that. You can say they're not financially sophisticated. True, they're not. They probably shouldn't have signed up, but they got a lot of incentive of people trying to get them to sign this stuff. And then selling the mortgage and reselling the mortgage and slicing and dicing the securities, and then nobody really knows who holds it. And I just don't let the banks off as easy as you do. And I certainly don't let off the wall. The local banks have been generally very good about this. I don't mean the regional banks, like, I'm not going to play about Huntington and Fifth Third and PNC, but the big Wall Street banks, they just aren't, they don't get off on this one. They are surely guilty of much of the financial cost. I don't blame it all on any single entity, whether it's an unsuspecting buyer who should have known better, or that lost the house or had problems, or whether it's the Wall Street banks. It's all up and down the line. But I just think the Consumer Protection Bureau, some of this stuff wouldn't happen. That's, I guess, where we disagree.
Well,
I want to keep it simple. I mean, part of the idea that we're charging Rich Cordray with former Attorney General that's running it is simplified, is make it fewer forms. My wife and I did the refinancing. I couldn't believe the number of forms. I know, it's terrible. And they're all pretty simple, and they're required this federal rule. I'm hoping they can combine some of that, make it clear and make it simple. Then you're right.
Well,
Go ahead. Sorry, I got the
sorry.
I'm not planning on running away.
Well, with Denver banking and his responsibility, the Fed's responsibility to be able to promote jobs, that he had limited tools at the beginning of the crisis because he didn't have access to the TARP money, so he wasn't able to set a market. So there was a great deal of uncertainty with the bonds and that.
Are you related to this guy?
I'm sorry, what?
Are you related to him?
I am not. I've never met him. I'd be glad to meet him. But I think that the foreclosures would have been diminished if there had been liquidity early, so there'd been less of a crash and less uncertainty.
I agree with that.
And so that again, I think if that could have prevented it, then that's the cause, and that's probably where there should be more paid to it. Even though there's an imperfect market, I mean, the market that Richard Cordray is working in, the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, to correct, are a lot of reforms that occurred 30, 40 years ago. But they were reforms at that point to be able to make it more transparent. I guess with regards to the market and with real estate recovering, to the mortgage interest deduction, is another bit of change. Let me change directions. That you mentioned that the National Association of Realtors has been supportive of you in the past, and this view is maybe a little bit out of step with the National Association of Realtors. But the mortgage interest deduction is the federal government's way to subsidize homeownership, to encourage homeownership.
Right.
So my question is, when we can point to markets in San Francisco, Florida, and New York, and Boston, where prices appreciate geometrically, not that township yet, but why would we in Ohio be interested in underwriting and subsidizing homeownership in areas that have produced bubbles in the past and are bound to produce bubbles again, rather than encouraging people to buy in one of the markets that has the most affordable real estate prices in the state or in the country?
That's a very good question. I don't know the answer. I think a partial answer is we're kind of in this together, and we do things as a nation where it costs a lot more to build a highway in California than it does in eastern Indiana or western Ohio too. But we do that as a nation. It costs more money to provide water and sewer in a small town than it does in a big city per person. But that's what we do as a nation. But I don't disagree with you. I think at some point, possibly part of what Lynn suggested, what happens with sequestration and cliff and all that, is do we look at certainly at second home mortgage deductions? Do we provide mortgage deductions, or as you say, subsidies for home ownership, and that's really what they are? And do we do that for homes above a certain price? And that may be a little unfair if you have a home in Cleveland versus a home in Oida School District. For the same size home, you pay a lot more in Cleveland, and so a $400,000 cap is a really big house here. A $400,000 cap.
I'm sure going the other way, that the houses in Oida were better than the ones in Cleveland.
I'm talking about more suburban, upscale. The prices. The prices. I mean, obviously prices. I grew up in Mansfield, same kind of town as Lima, same demographic in a lot of ways. And homes are cheaper, and so if you set, like, makes my better comparison. If you set you can't deduct above $500,000 homes, for example. That's not very many homes in Ohio as a percentage. It's certainly not many in Allen County or Richland County where I grew up. But it's a whole lot of homes in New York or Chicago suburbs. So that's the problem with setting a number. But I certainly think you can think about second homes. And maybe you do a number and you make it $1 million, or maybe you make it, I don't know, I haven't thought that through. But that's a very good question. So I would do this. Shut up now.
Jeez. No, Sherrod, insurance guy. First I was going to ask you, do you have insurance? So follow the insurance line. Yeah.
It's more likely to buy insurance from you than
I'm going to step out of that arena a little bit. I'm a small business guy. We have a lot of concerns, but one of our biggest concerns obviously is taxes. The tax liabilities that we continue to incur are bigger and bigger and bigger. And then let me throw this mix into you a little bit, because it's going to hopefully come back in full circle. We also provide health insurance. We sell health insurance. That's what we do. We know it's big. Our own agency, the premiums that we pay are ridiculous. For all you guys have group health, and we each we even still have a $10,000 deductible, and it's ridiculous. We know something has to be done. It's unfortunate that right now that the fix on the table is the fix of a national health care program. That's the payer is going to be the national government. So we look at that as a threat. Maybe it's an opportunity. We don't know. I've got about 10 people in that division that sell benefits. We don't know what we're doing. Having strategic meetings. That revenue could leave us. They all go to the exchanges, and we're out, and they're out. But we follow something got to be done. Going back to the first part of the question, with the tax liabilities that we're continuing to get hit with more and more and more and more and more. As small business, we look at this like, I'm okay as long as I balance my budget. As long as I pay my bills, I'm all okay. We see the taxes that we continue to pay going into this gigantic pot, and nobody can balance this budget. Nobody can put it together to a position of we're strong, now we're going. The Budget Control Act, first time I heard of that, I know that, very, very astute. We're losing faith of all this money going in and spend, and the government looks like a big old bad guy that we say, we don't know, I was just feeding you money, and we're not even getting anything balanced. And there's nobody out there that can tell us what's going to happen, like my business or your business, that if you don't get it done right, you're going out of business. We're out of budget every single year by trillions, but cars still go down the streets, we still sell insurance, we still provide a newspaper. So frustration is, how much more are we going to pay, and what's our risk, and is this thing all going to blow up?
No, first it's not. And I go back, I first came to the House of Representatives in 1993. I was in the House for 14 years representing sort of Medina, Lorraine, some suburbs of Cleveland. And in 1993, we had a big budget deficit. We passed a budget. They set us on that path. To many it looked partisan because it started off that first round of votes. 1996, now Governor Kasich was Republican chairman in a Republican House of the Budget Committee, and we worked with the 93 Clinton budget and the 96, 97 Balanced Budget Act, we produced, and the country produced, because people were working, over 20 million net increased private sector jobs in those from 92 to 2000. We produced the largest budget surplus in American history. And I say we, it was the fact that people were employed in this country. And again, high employment produces budget surpluses more than tax cuts or anything else, frankly. Then in 2001, 2 tax cut bills that particularly, I believe, had a bias towards upper, I mean, understand upper income people pay a higher percentage, I get all that, and higher numbers. But we passed 2 tax cuts. We didn't pay for them with spending cuts. We then passed a Medicare bill that mostly was a giveaway, in my mind, to the drug companies. Didn't pay for that. Then 2 cuts in Afghanistan didn't pay for that. I voted against all 3 of those: the war, the tax bill, and the Medicare law. And that's neither here nor there now. But we ended up going from the biggest budget surplus to the biggest budget deficit. And we know all this history in 2008, that it's gotten bigger. It's gotten bigger because of the Recovery Act, which is a company in Lima, American Trim, that was, did well, got some assistance in that. Third of the money in the Recovery Act was tax cuts for the middle class. And most of you would have gotten, almost all, probably all of you got. A third of it was to keep having to lay off teachers and firefighters and police officers in the states, as we put a third of that, about $800 billion back in the states, and a third was projects like American Trim and others. So, but then with persistent unemployment getting up in this state to over 10.5% in 2010, you know, then the budget goes to hell that way. So, I mean, you know that background. I think we're generally doing the right thing, but I see your frustration. We've done a number of tax cuts for small businesses. It doesn't seem like, I mean, I know the burdens continue and you're looking for relief, and I hope we can do that. And we've got to get spending under control, but most importantly, put people to work. With the unemployment rate, we're still, Governor Kasich and the legislature balanced the budget here. They did it partly by cuts in local government, but they also did it. I give them credit, but they also did it because the unemployment rate dropped 3 points, and they can take credit for it. I don't care. It's interesting. I think one of the politically interesting things this year is Governor Kasich and President Obama are saying, boy, the economy's really going pretty well now. That Romney's coming in with Kasich standing 10 feet away and saying, your life's pretty bad. No, I don't know. So there's some irony. It doesn't really matter who gets the credit, but we're going in the right direction. That doesn't really make you happy saying that, but I do think the budget issues are getting better, but not nearly, just like the jobs situation is not nearly good enough. And I know a county like Allen, like Richland, where I'm from, and they're kind of bookends on US 30, and they really face the same persistent problems of manufacturing job loss. And I really do think there's a focus now, not a bias towards manufacturing, but a focus, and we've got to figure out how to put people to help manufacturing. It's nothing creates wealth like the tank plant or like the taxes that say the Ford plant does. I mean, all of those things. So I think what happens in the next 3 months is really crucial. It needs to be bipartisan. It needs to be done right.
From what you understand, how bad or how much do we really have to buckle up in 2013, more importantly 2014, when the exchanges come in and these new tax unknowns are going to be into play? I mean, that's one of our big concerns. We're building a building in Bell Fountain. We hope to stock that about 4 or 5 people. Big deal. And we're looking at, we don't know that. We don't know that. No, we don't know that Obamacare, how much it's going to affect us. I'm not talking about the cuts less. I'm talking about how much we're going to.
I think you're going to have more. I mean, I think you're going to have more business. I mean, this is not. I mean, I know that people talk death penalty, talk government takeover. And this was a basically conservative think tank, Mitt Romney idea of doing these exchanges and getting people to do it through the private insurance system. This isn't. I mean, if we had done what some people wanted, it would have been Medicare for all. Then it would have been the government, would have been the insured. The government's not the insured. There's going to be a lot of people in Medicaid. I understand that. But there are a lot more people. The reason this is good for her hospital, and I think you'll find most hospital administrators eager, maybe too strong a word, but more than accepting, somewhere between accepting and eager of these new laws coming in, is they're going to start having patients that actually are paying, not having to shift costs. And when an uninsured patient comes to her hospital, your private insurers are paying more money. They say it's a tax. The probably correct statistic, it was about $1,100. People that have private insurance are paying about $1,100 tax, not really tax, $1,100 more because of all the people that don't have insurance that get care. And you know that's why I know a lot of insurance people have supported this general direction of doing, not a government this. So I think you do better. I mean, good luck to go.
Got 45 million uninsured out there that have possible prospects.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I respect what you're saying with that. However, you know, what's going on in that hospital industry is we're hearing that healthcare reform is going to take us down to Medicare rates. Even the Medicare rates are not sustainable for health systems. So while it's great to get the uninsured insured, we're still looking at getting them at the Medicaid or Medicare rates.
I understand that. I don't know. I mean, I've heard people say that too. I don't know that that's what is going to happen. It's prediction. I think that, I mean, you know, we've got to figure out how to, doctors and hospitals, I mean, there's increasing demand. I think part of it is these 30 million people, or from 40 to 45, you say, the number one Medicaid overall population, are going to end up getting treatment at a better time instead of a mother with no insurance with a kid that has an ear infection taking her son to the emergency room after the ear infection threatens their hearing. Long term, it costs more. They get them into the doctor's office. I think enough of that is going to happen, enough preventive care that I don't think that's going to happen. I do know doctors are afraid of what could happen with IPAB. I don't think IPAB is going to sit in judgment the way that doctors are afraid that it is. IPAB's this independent payment advisory board that is ultimately responsible to Congress if they overstep or don't do their job in terms of occasionally intervening and saying rates are too high. But I mean, you know, the other side of what you're saying, Lynn, is a whole bunch of people saying they're paying way too much, and we've got to find a middle ground. I mean, doctors want to be compensated well, as they should be. They have lots of years in school. I don't know where that ends up, and I don't have the years quite that you do, and the doctors. And my dad was a family doctor. He did that 10 years ago. That died 10, 11 years ago, but I am concerned about it.
Northwest Ohio was originally known as a black swamp, so drainage is imperative to the economic well-being of not just agriculture but all the residents. How do you justify the expenses and challenges to drainage efficiencies caused by increasingly overreaching EPA mandates and regulations through, you know, questionable use of the Clean Water Act? And a very good
Give me examples, I'm sorry.
case in point is the city of Lima built a reservoir, and they had to increase the cost and lower the size because they found a wetland and they're building a reservoir. They had to go around one wetland because of its rating, and the other wetland is buried under the water, but they couldn't dig there. I mean, there's no common sense, and it's costing farmers and the people of this part of the world anyway money, and it just puts an anchor on productivity. The EPA's, in my estimation, they could bankrupt the city of Lima with their, you know, mandates that they're putting on for separation of. It's not that we don't want to separate and have clean water, but it's the force of law that they seem to be able to conjure up and make residents do what they say they're going to do. I struggle with that.
The force of law initially comes from Congress. Congress designates EPA to look out for certain things. I've talked to Mayor about that specific case and trying to help. You know, EPA is, you know, we've done a good job in this country of safe drinking water and clean air. And I remember, and I'm old enough, some of you are, to remember my parents would take me up to Jim Beach, which was like Erie County, but I'm not sure where exactly it was. I was a little kid, but you know, Lake Erie, and I was in the early 60s, and you remember what the lake looked like. So, you know, the dead fish. And, so, you know, I would defend all of that, how we as a nation did that. I also look at what's happening in western Lake Erie with the Maumee River, the largest river tributary in the Great Lakes, and what's happened with the algae blooms in the western end of Lake Erie, partly it's shallow, partly runoff, all the things. And there's no individual person or group responsible for that, but that's where the EPA and the Army Corps have a very, very important job. And I know you're not arguing against that. I just think in these case by case, I advocate for people. I'm working with Mayor Armstrong in Defiance, and I work with Senator Voinovich on this, the whole issue of how we help these cities overall with water and sewer systems, similar to the reservoir, how these water and sewer systems that are so expensive and spread over a town of 6,200 or 10,000 or even 40,000. It's hard to do that. And while the pressure's on federal spending, we've got to find a way with these water and sewer systems of helping to finance them, because they're too expensive for a local manufacturer, and they're too expensive for the homeowners you're selling houses to in too many cases. So that's not a specific answer, except to say I advocate for communities all the time on when I think the EPA rule went overboard. And it really does affect things. I think as an agency, there's a lot of good things they do. I know as an agency, they harass people locally sometimes, and particularly local, government entities or situation, and we've got to do better that way. But I do worry about. One of the Senator Voinovich and we were only sent together for 4 years, but one of his major interests is how do we do this infrastructure? And infrastructure is everything from water and sewer to building up broadband to Rhodes State Community College and making sure we have. If any of you ever listened to NPR Science Friday, they do this really interesting, all kinds of different interviews. And they were interviewing a guy one time whose last name was Swift, and he had written a book on the interstate system, which doesn't sound very interesting, but it really was. It was sort of the history of how we did all this. And from the 40s, when Roosevelt kind of had some ideas about the interstate, Eisenhower did it in the 50s, into the 60s, 70s, early 80s, not just interstate, public schools and community colleges, and not broadband back then, but all that electrification. We did better than anybody in the world by far, and I really worry everything from what we do with water and sewer generally, not the wetlands part, but what we do with that to community college and broadband. I was in Chillicothe 3 days ago, and I'm working with them. Some of this came out of the Recovery Act to help them extend broadband through these hills in southern Ohio. And somebody was telling me this, they were telling a story of a boy in Marietta, in a town near a little area outside Marietta, had to go to his grandmother's house 3 days a week because he couldn't get broadband in his house because it wasn't built out to there. And they were, but one reason of stories, they told me that I remember this proportion, that you need 3 times as many towers in Southeast Ohio as you do over here. Because you can see Chicago from here, right, more or less. You can see Mount Bowling Green at least. And what you've done with broadband here versus Southeast Ohio, how do you ever build businesses and give kids an opportunity to learn if you can't get broadband?
They don't have any drainage issues though, because the water
Yeah, you got broadband here.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So that's a good point. Anyway, thank you.
What type of legislation do you think might be necessary to deal with some of these campaign finance issues and this increasing role we're seeing with the super PACs in this election?
I think first you should have disclosure, and we've tried, and it was filibustered against. I'm not sounding whiny here, but there's been more money spent against me in this election than any Senate race in the country. They're over $19.5 million, and you don't know who it is, and I don't know who it is, because it's all run through organizations like 60 Plus and Crossroads, organizations that the organization's names, and you can even look at the officers of the organization, but you can't see where the money comes from through those organizations. And I assume a lot of it's oil money because of my position on subsidies for oil companies. I assume a lot of it's some Wall Street money because they don't much like me either, but we don't know any of that. And I assume some of it's either Chinese money or money from companies that move production in a big way to China because of my currency bill that we got through the Senate. Senator Portman supported. It's been a bipartisan bill that will help level the playing field for particularly smaller U.S. manufacturers. So I think you start with that, and I hope the Supreme Court will reconsider, because it can't be good for our country with many people hate these TV ads. They're not advertising in the Lima News. They're only doing the TV stations in Lima, right, Mr. Publisher? I mean, really.
Mr. Ryan plays in that movie.
I take that back. But when he comes here, not every day. Yeah.
Well, you're here.
I guess I wanted to ask again about the fiscal cliff stuff. I mean, what is the prospect of that actually getting taken care of? I mean, obviously, we're a little bit busy with an election at the moment, and then we're gonna have what we'll have after the elections. But do you think that it will come to the cuts in January, or?
I
are we
think
getting
it
worked
won't
out?
be the automatic ones, but I
Yeah.
think we have to do something big. And I'm hopeful that's everything on the table, and including revenues, including particularly revenues for people above certain income levels, because I don't want to do what's in effect in the tax, and in fact, the tax increase for middle income people with the economy the way it's, you could argue about this stuff too. I think yes, the answer is yes, something significant should happen. If it doesn't happen in the lame duck, it will happen, I think, in the first 3 months of 2015. If we don't, I mean, Tim disappeared or not, Tim, I asked him all the questions. Tim the better as opposed to the other Tim. Was talking about, what's the, I mean, just the thought of where the uncertainty of not doing something fairly quickly and what that means for the markets. I think scare a lot of us. I'm not an alarmist, I'm not a pessimist, but I want the opposite of that. But we've got to act, and we've got to send the message that we will act. And both parties have to be mature people that care about this country, and I think my colleagues mostly are. They both.
We're coming off, a lot of people say it's one of the most ineffective congressional sessions ever. And I think,
Anybody not say that?
well, I'm trying to be
nice.
polite.
Home here, right?
And whether we have a Republican president next year or a Democratic president next year, the makeup of Congress is most likely to stay the same. So how, as a U.S. Senator, would you go about, blocking this logjam and getting the Congress back to help we move this country forward?
That's the right question. I mean, that's the most fundamental exhortation of all. I think there will be a difference. I think that Mitch McConnell, the leader of one of the political parties in the Republican Party in the Senate, said 2 years ago, my #1 goal is to defeat Barack Obama. And it may have been the #1 goal of many of you politically around this table, but the point is that no leader has ever, to my knowledge, said something like that publicly, which really emboldens his members to do a lot of the same thing, and that doesn't help the country. And you can see that, you've seen it on 2 bills. And here's why I'll tell you why I'm optimistic about it this quick. Highway bill and debt seal. Every time the debt seal is raised, whatever the president's party, the other party complains and yells at the president, criticizes the president, regardless whether it's Reagan or Bush or Clinton or the next Bush or Obama, that then every time the other party, the party not the president's, provides enough votes to raise the debt ceiling, never threatening that the United States of America would not honor its debt. And I know unhappy people already, Tim illustrated that on spending, but you don't not honor your debt as the United States of America. And what a number of people did in the House of Representatives, what it caused is, you talk about uncertainty, that was the worst uncertainty of all. And by and large, nobody in this country invested much of anything for those 3 months. It just froze investment. I think it did short and medium term damage to our economy. The business, a number of us talked to CEOs we know. I know lots of CEOs in Ohio. Some of them are supporters of mine, some of them aren't. I called many of both groups and said, help us put pressure on both parties to make this happen, especially on John Boehner. And they did, but they didn't put enough pressure. And they wrote a kind of tepid letter signed by 300 CEOs, I don't remember the number. But I think, the short answer, I think the business community will step up in a way to stop that kind of behavior. The other issue was the transportation bill. We've always done for many years, we've done a 5-year transportation bill. Some of the people in the House of Representatives that mostly Tea Party people said that if we don't, that they don't believe the federal government has this role in highways. And as a result, we couldn't get a 5-year highway bill. We got like a 2-year highway bill. And Congress didn't like that. The business community didn't like it because highway bills not just create jobs immediately. They set the foundation for Patrick to get his jobs, to get his products to market, and all that you do with that foundation. So I'm more optimistic because I think the business community will put pressure on both parties. I think it won't be about defeating the President of the United States anymore. It will be about actually doing some things. And I think that first, from Heather's suggestion or question suggests, I think at the beginning of the next 6 months, we really do get serious and Mitch McConnell, Harry Reid, Nancy Pelosi, and John Bader stepped back and realized we got to succeed.
With that, just real quick, Sherrod, when you talk about bipartisan, you're working with Republicans, you've been in the Senate long, in Congress. Could you just give us a real quick sample of what you're most proud of?
Sure.
Working with those guys?
Start with the Farm Bill that what John Boone and I did. Start with a bill that you've seen, I assume you've seen, if you haven't yet, that they started yesterday or something. I'm doing an ad with the Bluffton School, you know what happened with the Bluffton baseball team. John Betts is the father of one of the boys, young men with skill. He came to me, I worked with the senator from Texas, came in, that's a Republican. And we got the law changed for the first time. We have auto safety rules and airplane safety rules. We now have much more solid bus safety rules. And there was a lot of opposition from some of the bus companies. It was bipartisan and almost unanimous at the end. On my currency bill, it's not just Senator Portman voting for it. It had Republican co-sponsors from South Carolina, from Alabama, I believe, and from Maine. And that legislation is considered by many of the most important jobs bill, bipartisan, passed in 2011. On all the legislation I work with, I always work to find Republican co-sponsor. I mean, that's kind of the way that I think you need to do it to get something done. So going, you know, whether it was a higher ed bill, which we worked on 5 years ago, to something more recent, I'll keep doing it. Thank you.
As you know, I work with them every day. Our agency works with many seniors who are, and most of them are middle to low income, and we don't meet very many people who have a lot of money, and most of them are struggling just to meet their basic expenses. And healthcare is always a concern because people, as they grow older, have a lot more chronic conditions. And we found that Medicare works well. It's a good system, and I think our people would be afraid of big changes in Medicare or using that kind of coverage. What would you say to reassure people about the future of their health coverage?
I will never be part of allowing Social Security to be, you know, to be privatized through Wall Street and the same with Medicare. I think that Medicare is, generally, it's, you know, people in too many cases have to, there's too many co-pays and deductibles. It's still not free by a long shot. It never will be entirely free, but it's a system that's worked well for 47 years. When Lyndon Johnson signed it in July of 1965. I know we have to get costs under control, but in no way should we fundamentally change it. And I think there are ways of dealing with budget issues, and I can talk about a lot of those savings. I don't need to now, but everything from generics to the dual eligibles of Medicare, Medicaid. But Medicare needs to be a defined benefit, not privatized, not vouchers, because I think vouchers ends up with seniors paying a lot more out of pocket. So you could assure people that come to your agency that I will always oppose that privatization. It's fundamental to me.
My question's on federal and state tax, which is part of the fiscal cliff discussion. In January, it comes back to if you die with more than $1 million, it's a 55% rate on everything over that. I think both sides, reasonable people from both sides can say that some level of state tax is okay, and that's a compromise issue. What is that threshold? What's the percentage that's the right amount?
I think the threshold that we've had this peculiar, it was $1 million 10 years ago, then it went up. The threshold went up, the percent came down, and then it dropped off to 0. And then it goes back to 10 years ago, whatever the year was. I don't think anybody's either happy with the changes or, the process that changes every year, or happy with where it goes back to. I think it probably gets to 3 million, 2.5, 3.5 million, maybe as low as 2.5. No more, no lower than 2.5 is my guess. And it probably goes to 35 or 40, but I can't see going more than that. I can't see it being more than that. I can't imagine. But with these fiscal issues, it will be part of the grand bargain. I think if it were voted on separately, it would probably end up at 3.5 million. And it's times 2 in most families. That's what life in my house, of course. And it will end up, I would guess, at 35%, but that's just a guess. But I think that people would agree with you that most people think there needs to be something. But most people agree that $1 million is too difficult for support small businesses.
A quick follow-up on Dodd-Frank real quick. I have a lot of colleagues in small community banking who have complaints about the cost of this. And you mentioned not backing off on the big banks during the crisis and regulating them. But aren't a lot of them gone? I mean, Washington Mutual, a lot of them were wiped out in the crisis. And we have those big, giant mega center banks that are still standing, of course, I think they're watched because they represent systemic risk. And what about the local Union Bank in Lima, Ohio, or Jennings State Bank, these guys that are small community banks that really represent a sort of a diversification in the financial industry, and now they're being swamped by these extra regulation costs.
And they're not at all responsible for the crisis.
Right.
Yeah, I deal with community bankers all the time, since I'm on the banking committee, and that's right. They have, even one regulator that they've got to pay in the bank for weeks at a time, months at a time, affects revenue significantly the bottom line. Yeah, we've got to find it. We've done some exemptions on the credit union bill and some other stuff. We've done exemptions on, not the credit union bill, the site fees. We did some exemptions for small banks, but we've got to, the large banks, the 6 largest banks now, and this number isn't precise, I can't remember exactly, but 20 years ago, the 6 largest banks had something like 25% of GDP and assets. Now it's 65%. 6 banks range from $800 billion to $2.2 trillion in assets. And they're not just too big to fail, they're too big to manage and too big to regulate, really. And that's where our focus absolutely should be. I mean, I have legislation that would, over time, require those 6 banks to divest significant amounts. It's not an economy scale. A $500 billion or $2 trillion bank has the same economies of scale, and they are a threat. The economy, I think Bernanke won't exactly say he scored the bill, but he doesn't make pronouncements like that, because every time he takes a breath, something, just doesn't offend. And so, but more and more people are saying we've got to do something significant. I think Dodd-Frank generally, I know it helped. I think it generally puts us in a pretty good place for the potential problems of an implosion of the financial system, but it didn't do that, and it should have done that too. But I think you're right, and I would reassure, many of them come to me individually and as a group, and I'm certainly willing to work with them always, making sure that regulation, that these rules that should affect the big banks don't have the same water spectrum.
Second round? Let's talk education. We're parents of aspiring college students, senior in high school. Super question. In investigating the whole collegiate experience and cost and education in general, that cost factor seems to be in a similar trajectory as healthcare. What kind of policies or what kind of incentives can the federal government give the educational world to make collegiate and secondary education more cost effective with a greater return on investment? And then part 2, the easy part is, how does a son of a general practitioner come after mom and dad said, I'm going to study Russian studies at Yale? How did that go?
Be a Democrat.
Can be a Democrat.
Second more than the first one. So, the guy in your first question, that's an interesting view, because it's exactly right. It's healthcare and college have been the 2 biggest, I think, the 2 biggest inflation, the 2 biggest cost increase things that people want. I think Pell Grants matters. I think staffing loans and reasonable interest rates matter, but that's not the problem. I think it's mostly state governments, but it's an issue. When I got a graduate degree at Ohio State one time in the late 70s, and I was never full-time. I was one course at a time, and I was employed, so it wasn't any kind of a burden financially, but it was, in those days, Ohio State, whatever the tuition was at Ohio State, was a relatively, the state paid a much higher percentage of your tuition of your costs than they do now. So the states have kind of pulled out of higher education to the same degree they used to be. And we've got to make a decision as a society. Can middle class kids go to college? My wife's father was a utility worker in Ashland, Ohio, power plant. She was first in the family to go to college, first and 4 kids, all 4 of them went. And she graduated from Kent State with $1,200 in debt. Imagine that these days. And $1,200 books more than, that's books for 2 quarters, yeah. But I think those answers are really difficult. I bring together, one of the things I talked about convening, how important it is to convene and listen to people. I brought together, every year, I've done this 5 years, I bring together the college presidents around Ohio, from, Rhode State to Ohio State to Bluffton. I mean, a small 4-year private, public, and 2-year community college. Just bring about 60 of them, and no staff, just the presidents. Bring in elected officials of both parties, administration people. And one of the things that we talk about is best practice. How do we get costs down? How do we help them support the local businesses so they're training people to the community college level to work? And these are pretty loose. Nobody's got a real answer for what we do in this, but we've got to, as a society, make a decision. Are we going to help working class kids and middle class kids figure out a way to go to college and not be so saddled with debt that they can't buy a house to them, and they can't buy a car, and they can't do much of anything in those first years out of college. I mean, it's such an affliction we put on that generation.
Sometimes there's talk about forgiveness of student loans. I'm not a big fan of it only because of accountability. Whenever I've been held accountable, I've learned the best lessons from the mistakes I've made and decisions I've made. What are your thoughts on the forgiveness of collegiate loans?
You do it if it's ahead of time and you qualify for something. If you agree to be a teacher, your program like that is okay. But if you say, if you go into college knowing if I do this and I teach for 10 years, I guess I can't forget it. But I don't think you can do it indiscriminately. So I don't oppose that idea. I think it can be a good idea to get people in professions that we need. We can do all kinds of professions.
Second, Russian studies, yeah.
I had a professor that was just really interesting my freshman year when I was just studying history. And he got me really interested in stuff like this. There's an interest, it was interesting, but it does, it's helped my job a little bit, not much.
Can you define middle class for us, just so we
I
have
really can't, but I can try. Middle class, here versus.
We'll just say Ohio.
Yeah, I think, I don't know, 50 to 250,000 family income. I don't know. Everybody thinks they're middle class, but I don't know. But the better than defining it is what we're losing. We don't have the kinds of. That's why the auto rescue is so important, because it gave a ticket to a lot of people that joined the middle class and women. And so with decent benefits and good wages. I really do worry about what's happened with wages in this country. From 2000, I mentioned 2010, we lost 5 million manufacturing jobs. We've also seen worse than a stagnation of wages in those 10 or 12 years, where wages, so you're graduating people with debt, Patrick suggests, and then their wages are down too. And that's the pressure on all of these employers on wages now.
Senator, Judy had mentioned the concern about access to care for seniors, and you also rightfully mentioned that physicians are scheduled at the present time to take a 30% reduction in care, which obviously would threaten some of that access, also in primary care. What is your position on the sustainable growth rate?
I wrote the first bill to basically eliminate it, but unfortunately that got compromised in the session with both parties, where no presidents really stood up on it, and the Congress needs to find the money. If we're going to restore the sustainable growth rate is the method by which doctors are paid by and large and the Medicare. If we're going to pay for that, we've got to find other cuts. We've got to find other tax increases. We've got to find a way to pay for reinstituting the wage levels for doctors, the compensation to what it was traditionally, and that's every year we fix it, and every year it's harder because the cliff gets steeper and steeper.
Right.
And but as I said, I was this co-sponsor with Mike asked for bipartisanship, a guy from Florida, Congressman named Bill Rockus. He was the senior Republican. He was the chairman of the healthcare subcommittee. I was the senior Democrat, and that first bill, and I've been involved in it since. But we got to have a permanent fix, and we're not there yet.
I absolutely agree with you. I think the concern, though, is that it's going to, instead of really thoughtfully considering how we're going to pay for it, it's just going to be shifted in Medicare dollars. So if it's not the hospitals or if it's not the physicians, the fear is hospitals.
I know the fear, but I don't buy that. I don't think.
What we need to do to prevent that.
The last bill I introduced, the last proposal I made, with some others, it was more a letter than legislation, because there was going to be no bill passed at that point. Is that it come out of this fund that would be saved for bringing troops home from Afghanistan, so it doesn't have to be shifted within the healthcare law. And the problem is a tax dollar is a tax dollar, regardless of whether it's going to defense or CMS, Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services. But no, I don't think there's any consensus that it's taken from Medicare beneficiaries. I would not do that.
Senator, in the trades here, I think everybody in this area in the United States agrees our returning veterans, is a huge resource, and I don't think they get enough credit for the two wars that they've been in. But as the United States draws down its troop level in Iraq and Afghanistan, what would you say is some of the biggest issues that returning vets see? Because we love having them in the trades. I mean, they are just get up in the morning. They're used to doing that. Yes, sir, no, sir. They understand the chain of command, which we're real big in. But I guess the biggest thing is addressing the issues, if you can address those. And what can the federal government do to help these people? It seems like as a nation, sometimes we turn our backs to them with their huge unemployment rate.
There's a program that I'm the only Ohio senator ever to be on full service, full term on the Veterans Committee. I'm not a veteran myself, but I understand that they too often we don't do enough in partnership or directly. There's a program called Helmets to Hard Hats, don't you know of? And the trades have been big on that. I'll give you a specific example right now. I just was in Toledo today earlier, and we did I talked to some people about something called the Veterans Retraining Assistance Program. And you know that when veterans, are you a veteran?
No.
Okay. You know when vets, first the unemployment rate among veterans is higher than the national employment average for everybody else. That's inexcusable. Understandable maybe, but inexcusable. But what this program does is people, if you're 40 years old, you lose your job and you served wherever you served in the military, you're no longer eligible for the GI Bill. You did an updated GI Bill, bipartisan, the president signed back in 07, 08, President Bush signed. But it doesn't, it's only for more recent vets. So this VRAP, the Veterans Retraining Assistance Program, aims at veterans to be eligible. You're 35 to 60. You have to be a veteran who was discharged honorably and unemployed. And the stipend is about $1,400 a month to go to community college, to get a 1-year certificate and after you've lost your job. And it can be everything from welding to secretarial services to healthcare, IT, whatever. And it really, it's working. There are 99,000 spots available. I'm talking to people around Ohio just to get more attention to it because I want people to apply and go online. I mean, the great thing about going through Road State or Sinclair or Owens is community colleges are really good at counseling and helping you find jobs at the end of your training or during your training. And that's the best way to do this. And so it doesn't go through the University of Toledo or Bluffton or Bowling Green. It goes through Sinclair or Cleveland, Crowder Community College or Lorraine Community.
Is there any other issues just besides economic that you see?
Yeah, all the healthcare issues. Yeah, the VA does healthcare better. They have fewer medical errors. They do a very good job. And we've got these community-based outpatient clinics that there are about 30 of them in Ohio, places like Lima and Mansfield, where they're outpatient. They provide care to veterans. They help get in veterans for all kinds of training, for all kinds of screening. Vets come home. They're done with. They want to be done with the military a lot of times after they serve. They want to go move forward. My dad never talked about his religion service. I could tie him down, maybe get him to the hardly ever did. He was one move on as somebody do. And a lot of them need to come home and be tested for PTSD before they start doing things that suggest they've had traumatic brain injury or post-traumatic stress syndrome.
We got about 15 minutes for the form here. Any other questions anybody has?
Yeah, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac were created to be able to encourage home ownership. Government-sponsored enterprises. Any thoughts on their future and any thought on some of the new government-sponsored enterprise perhaps provide or assure liquidity in the financial markets?
Less opinion on the second on the first, because I don't know where we would go next with the first. There's been efforts to first play Freddie and Fannie for all the problems. Freddie and Fannie contributed, but they want to harder the problem. They kind of imitated Wall Street a little bit too much, that's where I fault it. But I think they need reform. I think eliminating them would cause problems for where the banks will sell these mortgages. So they need to exist. And I mean, the realtors, NAR, as you know, says that, and so do the banks like Huntington and others. So I think reform is right and elimination is wrong.
This is a lot of the strategic stuff and on the political side real quick. When we're out there talking to our constituents and friends, and these kind of conversations come up on United States Senator, who you like, who you don't like. I know I agree, your competitor is billing Senator Brown as a Barack Obama clone. And whatever President Obama does, Senator Brown's going to do that all the way. And having you face to face, and as we talk to our friends, people there, I'd like to care to comment on that.
I'm not always I like him personally, and I know him pretty well, and I work with him, and as I work with people, whoever's he's elected, if Obama's elected. My voting record, they will say, is 90% with the president. My opponent's voting record is 90-something% with his leadership in the House of Representatives in Columbus when he was there. So that's kind of what happens in politics, but my bipartisan record is way broader than his, and I think I'm proud of that I've been able to do that. I disagree with the president on a number of things, some publicly, some privately. One of them is my currency bill. He has not said he would support that. I think he's wrong on that. I agree generally that he's been more aggressive on trade enforcement than any president since Reagan, and that's really important to me. I mean, I think one of the reasons that PCS is here, it has grown, is because of trade enforcement. Just like we have more tires at the Cooper plant in Findlay because of trade enforcement, we have a steel plant in Youngstown because of trade enforcement. Bush didn't do that, Clinton didn't do that, and I mean, they didn't step up like this. So I agree with him more than I disagree, I think that, but I always look at things from an Ohio viewpoint. I mean, I pushed him hard in the auto rescue. He didn't need very much pushing, but I will always advocate for Ohio, regardless of party. We've had a disagreement on the tank plan. That's the Department of, and I don't know if it's with him or the Department of Defense, but it's his Department of Defense ultimately. And even though he kept President Bush's secretary for a number of years, and so if I was arguing with the Department of Defense, I don't know if I was arguing with Bush or with Obama, but it didn't matter. It was the Department of Defense. The tank plan's darn important here for reasons. I mean, I care about the jobs here, but I care more about the national security, and the tank plan is important to that. So I have had disagreements with him when I think necessary for the state.
You talked that, and you're very proud of your voting record, but yet National Federation of Independent Business, Chamber of Commerce have you one of the least friendly senators for small business. How do you justify those positions? Because
those are political organizations. Chamber of Commerce, I work with the local chambers of commerce all over the state. I'll give you an example. We had a bill, in response to David's question, we had a bill that was on the Senate floor called the Disclose Act, and it would require these companies, not companies, individuals, whoever they are, they're spending all that money in political campaigns, and simply require them to disclose where the money comes from. The Chamber of Commerce scored that as an anti-business bill. Chamber of Commerce, the National Chamber of Commerce, is a Republican organization, and so you may belong. I know plenty of people that belong that have written letters saying, why are you spending so much money against Brown? Because I took a backseat to nobody in pro-business. I wouldn't have got the Ohio CPA endorsement. And that's a pretty conservative group, the Ohio Society of CPAs. I wouldn't have gotten the support of so many CEOs around. I wouldn't have the kind of support I do in this campaign if I want. I mean, I had these scorecards and these ratings. I mean, a lot of people that run these organizations tend to have a real political, and I would say it's not the same on our side either, tend to have a real political skew to them, and I would defy that any day. And I understand the question, and you're not the first guy that's asking, Commissioner, but thank you for that.
You're talking about foreign policy. There seems to be a lot of discussion about whether we're where we should be and whether we're spending our money wisely. What's your take on sort of our military strategy at this point, and whether it's helping the country get where it needs to go?
I think it's usually, as it should be, bipartisan. I give the last two presidents, this one and his predecessors, credit for, since September 11th, keeping us safe. I think that I can only say so many things publicly. what I'm gonna say now, and I won't stop as soon as I say about 2 sentences. There are other things that could have happened that weren't, that didn't. Many I don't know about. I'm not saying I can access all this, but I know some things that were because of an aggressive intelligence and defense structure and establishment in this country, under presidents of, regardless of who the president is really, that protected people well. I support the idea of strength with, through the banking committee we've done, which is relevant in terms of sanctions with Iran, because I'm concerned if this question is starting to lead into that on Iran and what it means, not just oil, but every bit as importantly, stability in the Middle East, and Israel's as our closest ally, maybe anywhere, but certainly our closest ally in the Middle East. So I always, I mean, you're always heartbroken with what happened with the embassy and the consulate in Libya. But I also know we are a great country that still protects our national interests well. Presidents of both parties. I don't think foreign policy is going to be much of an issue in either of my race or the president's race. But it's an important consideration always. It's really our primary duty is to protect the United States of America from any kind of outside influences that could do us harm.
As you probably know, our baby boom group will be very large, and we especially like Alzheimer's, which have so many people, and increase the cost of nursing homes and Medicaid and even Medicare a lot. What do you think is the government's role in research and trying to perhaps find a cure or something that will help prevent this happening down the road with such an increase in cost and disabilities and chronic disease like that?
I just added my name to Alzheimer's legislation to, not a primary sponsor, but one of both parties to have more focus on Alzheimer's and researching. It goes back fundamentally to the question that you suggested and that Tim Stolly suggested on the budget. I mean, that's sort of an infrastructure question. What do we do with medical research and researching? We lead the world. I mean, our NIH is not even close. We are second to none, not even close to whoever's second. But it means a lot of expenditure of money. We're I believe, 30 plus billion a year. I think it's low 30 billion a year. And research, and not all of it's done in Maryland National Institute of Health. It's done, in Case Western, it's done in Ohio State, it's done in Cincinnati Children's. And Alzheimer's is both, in many ways, the most tragic disease to be classified, but it's such a tragic disease, and it's also sapping of our wealth in so much. I mean, perhaps diabetes saps more wealth because it's more in children. So it's hard for no elected official should make a decision. But this is should be Alzheimer's and this much diabetes. For those should be scientists in NIH, but we decide on the funding on behalf of all of you, and it's hugely in our public interest to make sure that these scientists, and that we keep young. One of the problems is we doubled NIH funding bipartisanly in the 90s. I was part of that with that Congressman before I talked about. The last 7 are between about 01 and 06, 07, and we're trying to, we scaled it up in 09. But the problem was we were seeing a lot of young researchers. If the pot's shrinking relatively to inflation checked dollars, people that get the grants are the pros that have done grant making before. The young, really smart scientists, as opposed to the older smart scientists. The young, smart scientists were given up because they couldn't win the grants as they were getting harder to get. And some went overseas, some worked somewhere else. And we don't want that to happen.
We're starting to see a lot of fiscal problems in other states, California, Illinois, if it gets to a point where those states are so bad that they come to the federal government for assistance, you're a senator from Ohio. Will you support that?
I can't imagine we do that. I just think that's a no-end. First, it's not fair, but I just think it's a no ending. There's never an end to it. So I've heard that. I mean, I've heard people say that could happen, but I don't see it. I just think that the federal government, doesn't matter which party's in control, it's just going to say no. I mean, there's going to be help with Medicaid, because Medicaid is Medicaid right now, if you're Mississippi, you get a higher percentage of your Medicaid costs are borne by the federal government than if you're from Illinois, which is a wealthier state than Mississippi. Ohio's somewhere in the middle there. I can't imagine. Thank you all. This is nice. Thank you. Except for town. Town the lesser. All right, good to see you all. Thanks.